my name's Jenny. Behind the camera there, that's Kitty.
Hello!
And we're the Naturalist Interns here at the Arboretum. And if you haven't seen our videos before, welcome. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back. We're so glad that you could join us today, because today we're visiting another one of the manicured or formal gardens here at the Arboretum. Now, in previous videos, we also visited the Japanese garden and the Italian garden. So if you haven't seen those yet, we definitely recommend you check them out because they're pretty fun. But today we're going to be visiting the English garden because these gardens are so amazing. We think they're an amazing part of the Arboretum, and our horticulturists do such a great job of maintaining them and keeping true to their styles, which I think is pretty awesome. Now, gardening and horticultural practices have been around for a long time, since way back in ancient Rome and Greece and in Egypt. And a lot of different styles have developed along the way. For example, in the later Middle Ages or in the Renaissance, we have the Italian style, which we talked about in a previous video, but they place a lot of emphasis on structure, outward views, symmetry, and they were basically gardens designed for a philosophical debate or for just pleasure. So that was really neat. But then you have styles like the French, which took influence from the Italian styles, but they made it their own. They put a lot more emphasis on radial symmetry and manipulation of water or plant structures, basically on a grander scale. And then you have the English style of gardening, which took influence from both the Italian and the French gardening eras, but they kind of made it their own. Towards the end of the 18th century, they kind of revolutionized gardening by the reintroduction of flower beds. And by the 19th century, they were actually partly responsible for the big surge of interest in Britain in private gardens. So that's really neat. They're based off usually the picturesque kind of landscape of Britain. So there's a lot more kind of structure and privacy. There's more flowers and color, instead of the big rolling landscapes that are featured before. So that's pretty awesome, I think. They just kind of turn everything on its head, and we're gonna visit the English garden that we have in the Arboretum based off that today. And as we kind of walk up to it, you'll notice one of the big features of this garden are the hedges. So the hedges in this garden, they're kind of all around, incorporated inside the garden as well. But they were initially incorporated into English gardens as a means to keep livestock out from getting into those flower beds that were just reintroduced and wrecking all those flowers. But they actually end up serving another purpose as well. These hedges also serve to create these basically outdoor rooms. They create a sense of privacy inside these gardens. And you'll notice as we walk through, they create a bit of a maze-like effect too. So why don't we walk on up into these hedges and have a look. Now you'll notice these big hedges, not only have they kind of circled and structured off our English garden, but in this little area, they've blocked off this little space as basically a little outdoor room. So that's the kind of sense of privacy and maze-like effect that we were talking about a little earlier. And we walk up a little closer to these mazes, or these hedges, I should say. The big ones here, they're actually made out of a beech. So if you walk up, one of the ways we can tell this is a beech is one of my favorite ways of telling that this is a beech is by these big, sharp, pointy buds. So they're nice and skinny and come to a point. And we saw beech-like hedges like this in our Italian garden as well, but they are also found here in our English garden. And sometimes if you have a peek inside the hedges, you find nice little surprises. For example, when we were visiting this garden a little earlier, we noticed something pretty neat. And I don't know if you guys can see this here, but if you have a peek inside right in the crook of this beech, you'll notice this mass of twigs. And if you notice and look a little closer, it's also full of mud as well. And that is a little surprise in this hedge. That's a robin's nest. So pretty neat. It's not just human visitors that visit our gardens. And even though these spaces are maybe a little bit more manicured and kept than some of the water spaces here at Arboretum, like our old growth forest, they still attract a ton of wildlife. And we can see a perfect example of that, which is kind of neat. You know, these robin nests, you might have seen one actually around, or if you haven't, keep an eye out, you might see more around, because robins are a pretty common species here in southern Ontario, and their nests are pretty distinctive. So a lot of times you find them kind of like in the crook of a branch, maybe in a shrub or a tree like this, and that gives them a little more privacy and security and shelter to help them protect the young that they're raising in it. But they can also be found in pretty human establishments too. So I've seen them before on sheds or over doorways and stuff. So definitely keep an eye out. And you can tell it's a robin's nest because they tend to incorporate a lot of mud in their nests. So the mother robin, as she's building a nest, she has all these twigs that she packs in with mud, these nice soft mud, and makes a bit of a stone or a cone-like structure. And as she has that little nest shape established and made, she lines inside that nest with lots of soft grasses to make things nice and cozy for her babies. So that's a fun little surprise we found in our hedge maze here at the English Garden. If you're visiting, maybe check it out and have a peek up at that nest. But of course, it's not just hedges and nests here at the English Garden. There's lots of other features as well. We talked about those flower beds, and we have all these amazing pathways. So why don't we turn things over to Kitty and we can talk about those a little bit and visit them as well. Yeah, of course, there's a lot more things to find right here in our English Garden. So let's go on and explore a little bit further. Of course, in this section of our English Garden, our hedge changes a little bit. Right along here, this hedge is actually made of field maple. So of course, field maple is a British species. You can see by looking at the leaves that they look a little bit like our native maple species because they have all of these lobed leaves. So you can see how the leaves are very lobed. And that is one way that you can tell this is a maple species, but you can just start to see that the leaves are also changing color over there, so that's really, really cool. So this is field maple. And of course, like a traditional English garden, we have lots of arbors and stone dust pathways and flower beds. And the flower beds really are a big focal point in our English garden. So we come on closer and take a good look at that. So by looking at our flower beds, you can see that the English garden is a little bit different from our other gardens. For example, if you have been to our Italian garden, everything is very formal. But with our English garden, you get a sense of more informality. Everything's planted together in a jumble in our flower beds here. So it's a lot less formal, but everything is kind of held nicely together by our hedges all around the flower beds, you can see as well. And of course, we have lots of different species in our flower beds. Typically, people will use perennial plants. So these are plants that live more than 1 year. The following year, these plants will grow up once again. So that's what we call a perennial plant. And we have lots of different species growing here that you're gonna see all throughout the season. And a lot of these flowering plants have nice, lovely, bright, colorful flowers. That tells you that this plant has evolved to attract insect pollinators. So they rely on insects to come to their flowers, to maybe eat a little bit of their nectar, collect some of the pollen for food. And as they visit flower to flower to flower, then they could bring pollen from one plant to another, and that can help pollinate the plant and help the plant to reproduce. So that's really awesome. You can even see on those pink flowers there's a little insect doing just that. So a little honeybee pollinating this flower right over here. So a lot of insect pollinated plants like this have lots of bright showy flowers or wonderful smells, and that helps to bring all the insects to them. So that's pretty awesome to see. That honeybee is getting some delicious food right now. It's covered in hairs all over the body, even on their eyeballs to help them collect pollen. So it's pretty awesome. Now, of course, this is a pretty spectacular part of our garden. It's not the only thing to see here though, because if we come on closer to our bench over here, check out this bench. Not only is it a fantastic place for you to sit and relax and take everything in, but if you take a really good close look at this bench, you can see some stuff growing on there. So of course this was not planted by the gardeners, this just happened on this bench. So we have some lichen over here, and we actually have another species of lichen on the other side of that bench. So bright green over here, it looks completely different. But these are both types of lichen, and we can see a couple more species spotted out all throughout this bench just now. So really cool to take a look at. But of course, lichen is a pretty unique plant. Well, it's kind of like a plant because it's kind of actually a symbiotic relationship between two different organisms. So it's not just one species. A lichen is made up of a fungus or a cyanobacteria and algae. So that's really awesome. It's made up of a symbiotic relationship that happens between a fungus species and a different cyanobacteria or algae species. So those two work together to live in places just like this, in all sorts of different habitats. You can find different lichen species, but it works really well, especially for the fungus, because fungus, if you can imagine in your mind a mushroom, for example, that's a reproductive part of a fungus. But fungus like that, they actually cannot photosynthesize. They don't have the pigment chlorophyll, so they can't harness energy from the sun and make their own food. That's why a lot of times you see fungus growing on maybe rotting structures or dead organic matter, because that's where they get the nutrients from. However, if they were to pair up with something like a algae or a cyanobacteria, which does contain chlorophyll, and they do make their own food through photosynthesis by harvesting energy from the sun, then that fungus can now live off of the food from the algae or cyanobacteria. So that's really awesome, a symbiotic relationship, and that creates lichen, and we can see all sorts of different species all over this bench. So lots and lots of different things to see here in our English garden. Of course, we have the flower beds, we have the hedges, we have the arbors, and all sorts of different viewpoints are connected by our stone dust pathways. So really awesome. That means that next time you're at the Arboretum, feel free to check it out. Sit in one of the benches. You can take a look at the lichen on that bench there, or just take everything in. It's a really wonderful place to just sit and relax. And it's a pretty amazing thing to see as well here in the Arboretum. So thanks for checking out this garden with us, and we hope you visit one day, or at least enjoy it through this video.